I would first like to acknowledge the Algonquin Nation, whose traditional and unceded territory some of us are gathered upon today, but certainly the project is undertaking on the unceded territory. So I'd like to recognize that off the top here. I'd also like to talk a little bit about some of the ground logistics of the webinar. For those who are not familiar with the Zoom platform, there's a few things that we'll go over. To ask a question, there is a Q&A button there at the bottom of the Zoom platform. So that's where you can ask your questions. And of course, we'll be saving questions for the end, but you can post them as we're going along and we'll certainly track them. Today, we're going to be talking about the NSDF project's cumulative effects. And for questions, please keep your questions within the scope of that topic area today, as that's kind of the expertise we have on hand today. Of course, if you have questions outside that scope, we will still note them and we'll commit to get back to you via email at a later time. But today, please try to keep your questions within the topic area. The other function there down at the bottom is the interpretation button. So this allows you to toggle between both official languages here in Canada, so English and French, as this webinar is available in both those languages and will be also recorded and be available in both languages on our YouTube page after this webinar is completed. So with that, I know that we have a couple people from the NSDF project on the line with us today. So we'll do some introductions. First of all, I'll start with myself. I'm Mitch McKay. I'm the manager of stakeholder relations for environmental remediation management here at CNL. It's myself and the team have been working on the NSDF's both public and Indigenous communications programs. So we're happy to continue to provide avenues like this to talk about these projects with the public and continue to do so. I'll remind you that we also have a follow-up webinar at 11 o'clock on our Whiteshell project. So hopefully there's some crossover interest there as well. Next, I'll move over to the actual project team that here's online with us today. So we have Sandra Fott and Callum Squires, and maybe I'll hand it over to Sandra to introduce herself and then Callum.
Sure. So good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Sandra Fott, and I am the manager of environmental remediation management licensing support. And with us today is Callum Squires, and Callum is an environmental assessment specialist with Golder.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. So let's move along to the actual presentation. We will, I guess, Sandra, you'll be first providing a short update on the NSDF project, and then you'll hand it over to Callum to talk about the cumulative effects. So with that, over to you again, Sandra.
All right, so thank you and good morning again. So today we will be giving an overview of the cumulative effects assessment that was completed as part of the Near Surface Disposal Facility, or NSDF, Environmental Impact Statement. We chose this topic as there's been a lot of interest and questions around how our project took into consideration other projects happening at the same time, both at the Chalk River site as well as at other sites along the Ottawa River. Callum will walk through this assessment. Next slide, please, Rachel. So this webinar is a part of a series of webinars we've been doing since 2018. Topics have been chosen based on themes we've heard from both public and Indigenous comments on the draft environmental impact statement. Many of these webinars can be found on the CNL YouTube channel, so you're able to go back and watch previous webinars that may be of interest. This one will be posted as well within the next few days. Next slide, please. So what is the NSDF? Right now, it is a proposal. The facility is a key enabling facility that will allow for both the remediation of historic low-level radioactive waste that's been stored at the Chalk River site for decades and allow for the revitalization of the Chalk River Laboratory through decommissioning of old buildings. Presently, some wastes are temporarily contained in waste storage systems that protect workers, the public, and the environment, but continue to build more and more temporary storage is neither sustainable nor financially responsible. Other wastes exist in soils affected by historic and ongoing operations of historic buildings materials that require decommissioning. CNL has a wealth of operating experience for low-level facilities, and there is international operating experience for these types of facilities as well. 90% of the low-level waste proposed to be placed in the NSDF is currently at the Chalk River Lab. The NSDF has engineered containment designed to safely isolate the waste from the environment for hundreds of years, at which point the levels of radioactivity would be similar to natural background levels. Next slide, please. So this slide shows our overall timeline. The environmental assessment process started in 2016. CNL has received a lot of feedback on the first draft of the environmental impact statement, and we listened. Since that time, we have made changes to reduce the inventory proposed for the NSDF, conducted a number of additional baseline studies to improve our understanding of the current site and conduct more modeling, and continue to develop the design. As well, we've had a number of international third-party reviews. In July of 2021, just a few months ago, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission announced the acceptance of the final environmental impact statement for the NSDF project and deemed the licensing application documents acceptable as well. The CNSC Commission's Secretariat is now proceeding with the scheduling of public hearing dates. Further details on how to participate will be provided once the Commission Secretariat has announced the two-part hearing dates. The 2021 final environmental impact statement for the NSDF project is available along with the federal provincial review team and public and Indigenous groups comments tables on the Impact Assessment Agency website. The final environmental impact statement can also be found on the CNL website. And with that, I will turn things over to Callum.
Great, thank you, Sandra. Okay, so first we're going to start with just setting the kind of groundwork here for the regulatory requirements specific to this EIS regarding the cumulative effects assessments. Under SIA 2012, which this project is going through for their EIS, there is the requirement to take into account any cumulative environmental effects that could result from the project in combination with other physical activities that could be planned in the region. The guidance for this, there's a few different documents in terms of how we set up the specific methodology that we followed in this particular assessment. So first is the CNSC, the generic EIS guidelines, and probably more importantly is the technical guidance for considering cumulative effects under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. there's a fair bit of guidance, pretty prescribed in terms of how you want to go about your assessments there. So next slide. On the next few slides, I'm just going to walk through at a high level the approach that we took for the cumulative effects assessment. And I'll say that these kind of different steps are pretty similar to what we'd be going through for at the project level. So just taking a look at what the project effects could be, and then figuring out how those project effects could act cumulatively with other projects. So we'll just start out here with step one. So this is scoping. Your first step is, what are your valued components? So what are those elements of concern, things that you want to protect, whether they be protected from a regulatory perspective, or if they're of particular concern to the public, Indigenous communities, various stakeholders. So those different components. We've got a slide in just a little bit that'll show you all of the ones that we've included here. The next piece is establishing your spatial boundaries, looking at how is the project going to interact with the immediate environment. So your project study area, then your local study area. When it comes to cumulative effects, we're particularly interested in what we call the regional study area, or RSA. This is the general area where your project effects have the potential to interact with other projects planned or proposed in the general area. The next piece is determining your temporal boundaries. So this is quite important because we need to make sure and understand if projects are even going to overlap in time with the NSDF project. So you'd be looking at, say, the construction phase, operation phase, and kind of the phases after that. The next one here is just kind of examining the physical activities that have been and will be carried out. This is determining your assessment cases. And we've got a little graphic here just to try and walk you through kind of from beginning to end. So first, it starts with your base case of, without the proposed project, what's there, understanding the environment. This is something that's important, especially for the NSDF project, because there's just so much information available, at the site because of all the monitoring that's been happening, for a number of decades. And this is something that is in the guidance where it recommends that if you can consider cumulative effects throughout your entire assessment process, to try and do that. And I think this is a good reflection where even at that base case, because of all that data, we are taking kind of more of that, cumulative approach or lens as we've kind of worked through the assessment. The next is the NSDF project effects. So how is your project going to interact with the environment? And then you essentially combine that with your base case, and that becomes what we call our application case. So, it's at that point that you identify, what mitigation do you need to put in place, and you determine if there are any residual effects, left once you've applied kind of mitigation and avoidance measures. Now, this next row in this little graphic here, this is where we start to get into the cumulative effects piece. Okay, we know what the project is going to do in terms of adverse residual effects. So residual effects are those that are left after mitigation has been applied. You then combine those with what we call reasonably foreseeable developments, or RFDs. And then that ultimately becomes your RFD case. So looking at the cumulative effects, those essentially the combined residual effects from your project and other projects become the RFD case. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, the next piece here is just going through the analysis. So looking at what your project activity is, understanding, if this is going to actually result in some sort of detectable change in your environment, and then understanding the effect on what we call your assessment endpoint of a particular VC. So as an example, on the terrestrial realm, you can be looking at, habitat removal, and other various kind of effects, residual effects. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to protect is, ensuring the, survivability and, ecological effectiveness of that particular species. That's, what you're trying to, judge everything against. Okay. So next slide. Okay, so these next stages are, so once you've gone through and either at a project level or at a cumulative effects level, you determined that there are some sort of residual project effects or residual cumulative effects. You know, what I kind of mentioned before is you identify your mitigation, whether you try to avoid or kind of lessen those effects. So you kind of develop that, mitigation. You take into account, feedback they may have received from the public and, other stakeholders. And then this next piece here is assessing significance. So this is really a, high threshold. It's a yes or no answer of, are you, having a significant adverse effect, whether that is at a project level or once you combine your project with the residual cumulative effects of others, is that a significant effect? So, that's where we'd be looking at, is the project or is the combined effects of your project and others, from a terrestrial standpoint, affecting the, survivability, sustainability of, a particular species. Okay, it's not just, if there's habitat removal, it's that really high threshold. This is, written directly into the guidance. It's an important feature because it's really a helpful yes or no of, if you have a yes, it's something you need to look at, very carefully, and you need to try and kind of minimize those effects. And a regulator would look at that very closely as well. It's important to note that the NSDF project, though, is not planned to result in any significant adverse effects. And then finally, you have follow-up. This applies for both the project and the kind of cumulative effects stage, where if you have any residual effects, you want to follow up, monitor. You're looking at your effectiveness of your mitigation. You're also making sure that the predictions in your EA are accurate and making any modifications over time as necessary. Next slide. Here's a table that we took directly from the EIS. It lists the different reasonably foreseeable developments that we included in this particular EIS or RFDs. You can see here that the large majority of the potential activities in this general region are associated with CNL. You can see kind of in this kind of first grouping here, and a large portion of those are actually planned directly within the CRL site itself. So these are, quite localized to a particular area. There is, one other CNL project, the MPD closure project, which is a little ways away. However, it is important to note that that project is going through its own separate federal assessment. It'll be looking at cumulative effects itself as well. So if we kind of take a look at, what's happening potentially within the CRL site over the coming years, you can see adding in new infrastructure, office buildings, decommissioning, remediation. There's also a potential for a small modular reactor, which will go through its own federal environmental assessment. So there's a number of things, but they're, for the most part here, you can see it's restricted within the site. There is one additional kind of non-CNL related one that we did identify in our assessment is potential work that's going to be happening at the Garrison Petawawa. So renovating some buildings, replacement of some obsolete buildings. But that is, a good distance away from our particular site. To the next slide. So here we have all of our different value components that we considered as part of our environmental assessment. These are, like I mentioned before, these elements of the environment that are things that you want to protect, either identified through the public or other means or different stakeholders. You've got atmospheric environment, so that's taking into account both just general air contaminants as well as greenhouse gases, geology, hydrogeology, surface water and aquatic environment. Aquatic environment is kind of more the fish and fish habitat piece, where surface water is surface water quantity, surface water quality. And then the broad one, terrestrial environment. There's also ambient radioactivity and ecological health. This is looking at from that radioactivity perspective, on the kind of non-human health piece. So looking on, birds, plants, animals, kind of those interactions. And then of course, human health. There's also land and resource use, so socioeconomics and indigenous interests. So there's quite a few of them here today. We're not going to walk through every single one. We've got 4 of them that we think give a really good kind of snapshot of the different approaches. And you'll see these are the ones that are highlighted in blue font and italicized. So surface water and aquatics, terrestrial, human health, and socioeconomics. So we'll walk through those in a little bit more detail. Just before I move on, we can move on to the next slide. Great. Okay, so we'll start with the surface water and the aquatic environment. This is a particular one that does draw on the results of the other assessments, in particular what was done from a hydrogeological perspective. So groundwater monitoring, groundwater modeling, so determining how things move through the kind of groundwater landscape and potentially come to surface and interact with the surface water environment. On the right-hand side, you'll see just an image here. It's outlining the spatial boundaries of this particular assessment. The purple dashed line is our RSA, or regional study area. So that's the area where there's potential for interaction with other projects. So we kind of have that much larger area. The NSDF project is quite smaller than that. You can see the red polygon right in the middle there. And then the dark black, that's the kind of the project level, the local study area. When we looked at the RSA for this particular assessment, we made sure that we included the full spatial extent of both the Perch Creek and Perch Lake watershed. We also knew that it was important to include a portion of the Ottawa River downstream from the project. So that's also included in the RSA. For this particular assessment, the kind of final takeaway here, as we kind of note at the very top, is that an RFD case was not presented for these 2 particular pieces. And there's a number of different variables of what goes into that. So I think it's important to make the distinction that we say that an RFD case is not presented. It doesn't mean that we didn't consider it. It's just for various reasons we determined that there were not expected to be cumulative effects that we needed to kind of assess and determine significance. So first, it is important to kind of recognize once again that this is a site that has been heavily monitored for decades. There's considerable amount of data that is fed into the assessment, which gives us more certainty in our predictions, when it's coming to characterizing the baseline environment, and then also determining effects with other projects. Many of those projects that will be happening in this exact same highly studied environment. For the surface water components, we determined that the other projects are not expected to overlap spatially with the potential effects of the NSDF project. And this is because there's considerable management practices, so erosion sediment control practices, surface water management systems already in place at CRL site, really to kind of minimize the effects of their current site and any new planned developments. So the effects just aren't expected to kind of overlap there. Another really key piece here, and this applies to surface water and really to many of the other different kind of elements here, is the NSDF itself will actually enable CNL to remediate other contaminated lands, kind of those legacy waste management areas. And ultimately, this is expected to have a positive effect, so on this particular VC, so hydrology, surface water quality, and the aquatic environment, but also many other of the different VCs. So when it comes to the fish and fish habitat piece, another element was, once we did the project level effects, there wasn't even any measurable residual effects on fish and fish habitat. So there really isn't anything to act cumulatively with other RFD projects. So this is all the rationale for why there wasn't an RFD case presented. Move on to the next one. So here we have the terrestrial environment. So there's going to be 2 pieces here. I'll talk briefly just on the terrestrial environment, just more generally, and then we'll get into an interesting example here on the Blandings turtle. So with the exception of Blanding's turtle and bats, we've predicted that there are not going to be any significant, adverse effects on all of the terrestrial value components. And this is relying on a number of factors. So once again, all of that ongoing environmental monitoring that's been done over the decades, has been fed into this assessment, allows us to characterize the baseline in the regional area. The planned new infrastructure, that's often located within already existing disturbed areas in the CRL site. So that'll limit their own terrestrial effects of disturbing vegetation and such. Once again, we've got how the remediation and decommissioning will positively affect the terrestrial biodiversity in the area. And also when it comes to the SMR, just based on the particular locations that are at least being considered right now, that they also aren't expected to overlap from a spatial perspective with the terrestrial biodiversity residual effects from the NSDF project. Move on to the next slide, and this will be Blanding's turtle. Here we have Blanding's turtle. This is a really interesting one because it's something that CNL has been working on quite a bit over the last number of years. Blanding's turtle, they have been identified at the site, since 2009. It's something that CNL has been closely monitoring for a number of years. They also developed, what was called a comprehensive Blanding's turtle road mortality mitigation plan for the entire site. They are currently implementing that. We'll talk a bit about some of the things that have already been done on that particular plan. So this includes elements for just the site in general, which happen regardless of the NSDF project, and also some elements that will be added in, if NSDF is approved. So just to characterize, what is the NSDF project doing? It is, proposed to permanently remove approximately 26 hectares of proposed critical habitat. It's important to put that into perspective, comparing it to the regional study area. So here you can see it really is only 0.9% of the currently available proposed critical habitat. Now, when you get into the assessment of what is ultimately going to happen for Blanding's turtles from a cumulative perspective, the weight of evidence that we have, once you take into account all the mitigation that's committed by CNL already being implemented, the NSDF project is not expected to jeopardize the survival of the regional Blanding's turtle population. And there's a number of important factors that feed into this. So first, site clearing itself, it's not going to cause Blanding's turtle mortality. And this is because this will be performed in the winter, and this is where this type of species is hibernating. So there won't be that project interaction. Another important piece is the exclusion fencing will be installed around the NSDF construction footprint, as well as reptile hotspots along Plant Road and culverts. So this is kind of where the road mortality piece comes in. So and where CNL is actively implementing that Blanding's turtle road mortality mitigation plan, just to greatly reduce the potential for road mortality within the site. They've also installed a number of different kind of eco passages or turtle culverts, so about 8 of them at the CRL site already. 4 additional ones are planned if the NSDF project is approved. CNL has also created a number of new nesting mounds on both sides of kind of these culverts at the CRL site. It's important to note that CNL is actively monitoring these this kind of new habitat that they've developed. So they're looking at these weekly during the nesting season. Based on the results that they've been able to get thus far, they're still early into the monitoring, but they are seeing turtles kind of using these particular features, whether it's Blanding turtles or snapping turtles. So it is actually getting use, which is very promising. And then ultimately, when you look at the proposed kind of critical habitat, that will be removed of the project. This is something that CNL is looking at, from a site-wide perspective, making sure that there is no kind of significant loss of it at the CRL site. And also working with the federal regulators then to determine if any compensation measures need to be initiated later, either at CRL or elsewhere. Okay. Move on to the next slide. Here we have the human health assessments, and I'll just start maybe just with the image here on the right-hand side. You can see the purple boundary, which is our regional study area. The regional study area is meant to capture, the potential effects related to kind of different humans, whether they're, harvesters or people, using or living the landscape. We'd be looking at potential exposure to different, say, airborne or waterborne emissions, or direct gamma radiation from the waste. And you can see that reflected in the regional study area here. So for the big circle, that's essentially the big circle is actually the air quality study area. And then you can see the section of the Ottawa River that's also kind of included in that. So essentially we're combining those larger regional study areas to form the human health kind of regional study area. So from a human health perspective, this is another example where an RFD case is not presented because there aren't expected to be kind of those cumulative effects that you would measure and determine significance. We note again just the significant amount of data that's already available with the significant amount of data that's already available at the site. When it comes to the kind of incremental, radiological and non-radiological emissions from the RFD projects, so the reasonably foreseeable developments, those other non-NSDF projects, so those projects at any one time are expected to be small, distributed across the CRL site, and removed from the more intensive, activities with the NSDF project. So, really, removing that kind of spatial components you can see in our second last bullet, where these potential effects are not expected to spatially overlap. So between the NSDF project and the other others. So finally, this is kind of a recurring theme of just how the NSDF project will enable the remediation of those contaminated lands, which are expected to act positively with human health in general. And just move on to our next one. So this is our last topic, our kind of value component that we're going to talk through today. This is the socioeconomic component. There were a number of different residual effects that were identified at a project level that then get carried forward into the cumulative effects assessment. So first is employment contracting and supplier opportunities, directly from the NSDF project. So that's a positive residual effect. There's also increased pressure on commercial accommodation. So that's looking at it from both a positive and negative. So positive, right, bringing money into the region, but also looking at it, or at least assessing it to see if there's a a negative effect of are we using up all of the available space for this particular project, right? Which we're not, but it is we are looking at kind of both sides of the coin there. And then kind of in a similar approach is change in the demand for community services. So does this project drive an increased need for that? And then finally, increased road degradation. On the right-hand side in the image, you can see that we are looking at a very large kind of regional study area for this. We've got the communities of Petawawa and Pembroke, are located, 20 to 30 kilometers from the CRL site. We also recognize that workforce and business opportunities could be sourced from either the city of Ottawa and portions of the province of Quebec, and that's why you can see them also represented in our regional study area. Next slide. Okay, so here we've got kind of the end result of the cumulative effects piece for the socioeconomic environment. The cumulative residual effects are not predicted to be significant for the RFD case. So there's a number of variables that feed into this. First is not all of these RFD projects will actually happen at the same time. Their labor requirements are expected to be small, so their ability to adversely affect commercial accommodations is expected to be relatively low. Also, CNL, because it is a well-developed site, it has its own existing emergency protective services that it can draw on for this particular project. And the existing services around the NPD site and another project going through that federal EA are also expected to be sufficient. In the case of, say, a more serious incident that requires off-site hospitalization, if this were to happen, it is expected to be quite limited, just given the the size of the workforce, both for the NSDF project and the RFD project. So it's not expected to put an undue strain on the local infrastructure. And then finally, once you look at the kind of incremental increase with respect to traffic from all of the applicable RFDs, that is expected to be small, when considered with the NSDF project during construction, which is kind of that peak period where there would be higher levels of traffic kind of during that construction period. So overall, the cumulative effect is not expected to be significant given kind of those small effects there. Okay, we'll do the wrap up. So just the next slide, thank you. Okay, so just to summarize here quickly, the NSDF project EIS, followed SIA 2012, assessed both project levels, so what is the NSDF project doing, and then cumulative effects of the NSDF project plus other projects in the area. So we identified a variety of different reasonably foreseeable developments, in particular the ones that are happening with the CRL sites. We identified, are they actually, even if they are, in the RSA, are the effects of those projects going to overlap spatially? And then temporally, are they going to overlap as well? The overall results of the cumulative effects assessment here, we've got, so in most cases, an RFD case was not required. And this is largely due to the NSDF project effects not being predicted to overlap spatially or temporally with the RFD project effects. And for the value components where there were cumulative effects identified, so we took a look at that, say on the Socioec one that we just went through, these cumulative effects were not significant. And that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Callum. Appreciate the presentation and also appreciate the update from Sandra on where the project is. So far, we have one question in the queue here, but I will encourage others to ask away now as this is the time to get those questions answered. So the question is, and obviously they've taken a look at some of the details in some of the documentation. I note that the regional study area for airborne emissions, and they're quoting figure 5.2.1+4, does not match the pathway model for the calculation of site DRLs. Further, it does not match the known windrows for the site. Please explain why. So maybe I'll hand it over to Sandra to give a little bit of context to the question perhaps, and maybe Callum can look up the figure quoted and at least give some sort of indication. And again, if we're not able to give a fulsome answer here, we can certainly respond via email as well. So Sandra.
Thanks, Mitch. So I think that we will have to get back to the commenter on the response for the question, but I will turn it over to Callum and see if he can provide any insight. But I believe this is a very specific question about the air quality assessment that was done, not necessarily overall for the cumulative effects. Callum, are you able to answer this question, or is this a take back?
Yeah, I'm not an air quality scientist by trade myself, so I think to ensure that we give a fulsome and accurate answer, it's probably best to take that away, and we can work with the air quality scientists that actually, worked on this assessment and get a good answer for this person.
Thanks, Callum. So the commenter was an anonymous attendee, but CNL does commit to providing everyone on this webinar with a response.
Okay, thanks, Callum and Sandra. I don't see any other questions coming up in the queue. Just have me another look here. Well, Callum, I guess you 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 answered all the questions with that great presentation. Oh, there we go. We just needed to give some time, and we got some more. Okay, so that's good. So to determine the cumulative effects for the project, one needs an accurate description of the RSA. So is that a follow-up to the first question?
No, I think that's a separate question. So Callum, maybe you can talk about how we determined the regional study areas. This is more a comment than a question, but I think we can give a little context.
Yeah, certainly. So I think it's important to note that there isn't just one RSA. They are determined on discipline by discipline approach, and you could see that on just some of the images that we walk through, just where there are kind of different RSAs. The RSA is meant to capture the potential area where your effects, so the NSDF project, could possibly interact with other existing or reasonably foreseeable developments. So this really is kind of your largest study area included in the assessment. So that's why you can see just on those images it was kind of the largest, but they are determined at at a discipline by discipline specific perspective. In the EIS, you'll note that these are described in each of the environmental sections. So if you want to understand a specific regional study area for, say, air quality, or terrestrial or others, there is more detail in the EIS that you can kind of take a look at.
Okay, thank you for the question, and thank you, Callum, for the answer. Next question. Can you outline the design of your reptile exclusion fencing?
So again, it's Sandra. What we currently have on the plant road that we're using for the fencing, we're following the Ontario standards for the turtle and reptile fencing. Again, we don't have our biologist online with us today, but I know that there is a standard document that they're following that's produced by the government. But we can again follow up and give which document that is.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. And a follow-up actually on the documents, someone else is asking, where can we get a copy of the baseline studies and the third-party reviews that Sandra spoke about at the beginning of the presentation?
Okay, so there are a lot of baseline studies. So all of the baseline studies are summarized within the environmental impact statement. So on a chapter by chapter basis, sorry. And associated with the environmental impact statement were a number of technical supporting documents. So any of those technical supporting documents, which cover each one of our major components, so surface water, groundwater, air, etc., are available upon request. So we'd be happy to send anybody whatever documents they're looking for. What was the third part, Mitch?
Sorry, third-party reviews.
Oh, third-party reviews. Okay, so one of our third-party reviews is available on the CNL website. It actually was conducted through Atomic Energy of Canada Limited. So that third-party review is also on the Atomic Energy of Canada website, and we can provide you the link to that third-party review as well. It looked at mainly the post-closure. This one in particular looked at mainly the post-closure safety assessment, post-safety case, as well as the environmental impact statement.
Okay, thank you, Sandra, and thanks again for the questions. I think, Nicole, are you able to provide the link to that third-party review in the chat? And then we'll also send it out as part of our response, but
I
maybe
think
we
she's looking up it up right now.
She's gonna go put it in
She's
there right
nodding
now.
her head.
Awesome, thank you. I don't see any other questions coming.
So maybe since we have, we're 1 minute over time, but maybe since we just have a second, I do want to mention that in the next couple of weeks, we're starting to do technical discussions on the draft environmental assessment follow-up monitoring program. So details on the 3 sessions that we're holding are on the www.cnl.ca/events page. These sessions will be broken out into each component, so effluent, groundwater, and then environmental. Again, they are considered technical sessions, and pre-registration for these are required. So if you are interested in learning more about the draft environmental assessment follow-up monitoring program, I encourage you to register for these sessions. That the draft the EAFMP is not finalized until after there is a commission decision. So it is still considered draft, and we are looking for feedback on that. The document itself is available on the CNL website, the NSDF documents in English and French.
Okay, thank you for that reminder, Sandra. I don't see any more questions have come in, and we are a little bit over time, so maybe I'll wrap things up. So I'll thank both Callum and Sandra for the presentations today and the information sharing. I'll remind everyone that this was recorded and will be available on our YouTube page. And we will be following up with the questions that were put forward today and that we weren't able to fully answer, along with some of the links. So do appreciate that. And we do appreciate the time you spent with us today. So I know people are busy, but taking the time to learn more about our project, CNL really appreciates. And we hope that you have some time in about 10 minutes to join us for an update on the Whiteshell Closure Project as well. So thank you once again. And with that, we will sign off.